Hello everyone, welcome to The Green Man. Hope you're all good and well. So in this video I'm going to be talking about three films, a trilogy of films. The first of which is pretty highly regarded as a bit of a cult classic really. It gets that tag. And it is a really interesting, unique and pretty special film to me because I remember the first time I saw this film and I was gripped from the start to the finish and felt like I kind of almost wanted to watch the film again straight away after finishing it. So I'm of course talking about the Cube trilogy here, and I'm going to talk about each film in turn. So the original, the first film from 1997, directed by Vincenzo Natali, I'll talk about first, and then I'll go on to talk about Cube 2, Hypercube, and Cube 0. Now for me, the sequels, for my money, aren't nearly as good as the original film, but they do have one or two aspects about them I still quite like. So let's begin with talking about the original film Cube from 97. Here we go. And so Cube, if you're not familiar with Cube, it is a sort of psychological survival kind of horror film, and it pits people almost like in the same sort of situation. They're all put into this cube-like structure in these cube-shaped rooms, and they all have to negotiate their way and survive alongside each other to negotiate their way around this kind of cube structure. And some of the rooms have traps in them. So one of the things I now think when I watch these is that the first film may well have been an inspiration for the Saw films. But you know, this I wouldn't want to say this is like Saw at all, because I think this is, or a lot of the Saw films, because this is a very sort of, pretty psychological and quite a, clever little film with how it's sort of set up, and the mathematical element I really like as well. It's kind of depending on the sort of, there's a whole link to prime factors and which rooms are the dangerous ones, which is really quite interesting too. So if you want to geek out a bit on that aspect of things, the film has that. But I think where the film succeeds the most is in its claustrophobic atmosphere, the tense scenes between the characters, and the first film in particular has some pretty good performances, I think. I mean, this is a low budget film and probably the actors aren't very well known, and they still do pretty well. I mean, I think particularly the actress that plays Holloway, Nikki Guadagni, I think does a really good performance in this film. Maurice Dean Wint is pretty good as the loose kind of this increasingly unhinged character who becomes more and more creepy and psychopathic as the film goes on. I ought to put a spoiler warning actually as well, because I may talk about a few moments in the film that I really enjoyed too. So spoiler warning from here on in. Yeah, it's a great little film. An hour and 20 minutes, not too long, but there are some great, some pretty horrifying segments as well with what happens and to some of the characters. The earlier sort of kills in the film, if you like, the deaths, are the more grisly ones, and as the film progresses it becomes more about how the characters handle each other and deal with each other within the cube, within the restriction of being in this really sort of, like I say, claustrophobic situation with each other, and how they are trying to escape from that situation. Now you have in Cube, you have a sort of a relatively unknown cast, but you may recognise, if you watch Deep Space Nine, you might know Nicole de Boer, who stars in this film. You've got David Hewlett as well, who's David Worth in the film, and he is in Stargate Atlantis. So any Stargate lovers, I am a Stargate lover, but I've never seen Atlantis. I loved SG-1, but I haven't seen Atlantis. So there's a couple of known-ish names. I mean, maybe not massive names, but if you're a sort of sci-fi lover, you're more likely to recognise those kind of actor and actresses' names in this film. But yeah, it's great, I think. Some of my favourite parts, some of my favourite scenes, I think there's the sort of the Wren scene early in the film is a pretty amazing scene actually. I think it's pretty shocking, but just well done. And then you've got the sort of the scene with Holloway when what's his name, Quentin, when he drops her outside of the cube into, that sort of presumably a fall, which kills her obviously. And there's some really tense, really great scenes throughout, and it's just a great watch. As I say, because it's short, it's not going to take up much of your time to watch either. So I would give it a shot. If you're not familiar with Cube, it's a great little film, believe me. Now the next film we're going to talk about is the second film in this trilogy, called Cube 2, Hypercube. And it's not really a great film. I don't think it looks as good as the first film for a lot of it either. There's some pretty bad CGI, which looks very dated. And as I say, despite it being a few years after the first film, this came out in 2002. I'm just trying to remind myself who directed this movie as well. It was Andrei Sikula. And it stars, actually I really don't know any of the cast in this film at all. You've got Carrie Matchett, who plays Kate, Geraint Wyn Davies, Neil Crane. I think Geraint Wyn Davies plays this Simon character. Actually, his performance in this is quite good. He's sort of the Quentin type character, the psychopath within the group for this film. And he's quite good, I think. Actually, his performance is pretty good, and one of the more sort of, without him, I think the film wouldn't have been as watchable. I mean, it's watchable. It's not a great film, like I say. It doesn't really hold a candle to Cube 1, but it has interesting stuff. So you have, again, in this film, a fairly small group of characters that get together, each with their own skills or relationships to the cube itself. And again, you get some traps. It's sort of it's still the minimalist. It still keeps minimalist, like the first film is minimalist. This carries on that trend of being pretty minimalist as well, but it expands a little bit by having a sort of four-dimensional concept where you have time and space coming into things, and all these weird things happen within the cube that are less kind of maybe as basic, if I can call it basic, from the first film, but it becomes a little bit harder to understand than the first film, I think, and a little bit far-fetched. And also, some of this film really doesn't, the twists feel much more forced than the first film's twists. I liked the first film's twist. This one feels more forced and not sort of as natural, and therefore harder to kind of enjoy the film and to really kind of relate as much maybe to the characters too. I didn't think the characters in this were very likable for the most part. I mean, Kate was okay, I guess, and one or two others maybe, but to be honest, not as sort of as good a cast of characters to me, and maybe the performance weren't quite as good either. And like I say, just everything, the execution of this film wasn't quite as good either for me. And you could tell, and that's been another low budget for this film. I don't know actually the details about budget. It's very hard to find much information on these films online. What I have found about them is going back to Cube 1 briefly, I found an interview with the original director of the first film, so I might put that up in the description box. But besides that, not much information online about these films. But partly the reason they're regarded kind of more as cult classics, I guess. But yeah, this film not nearly as good as the original one. I did like so a few scenes in this film. Sort of being a bit more positive, I guess. There were a couple of scenes I liked, which sort of still had the intensity there from the first film. In a couple of the death scenes, I thought they were a little bit unnerving and still quite effective. Like when Simon has the vision through into one of the other rooms of his, essentially being his head getting taken off, which is pretty unpleasant. And you also get a sort of another death scene with this guy called Jerry, which, even though the CGI wasn't very good, the tension in the scene was very good, and I thought this kind of weird structure was, kind of artistic in a way. But like I say, the CGI didn't make this film feel particularly good at times. I think they would have been better sticking more with what they used, just much more from the first movie. So anyway, yeah, that's this one. The last film I'm going to talk about is the third film, Cube Zero. And this one, I'm going to have to remind myself who directed this as well. This was Ernie Barbarash that directed this. This came out in 2004. Second sequel, third film. What this one does better than the second film, is I think it gets the look of things slightly better, and it's not sort of, it's a bit more, just looks slightly better as a film than the second one did, and gets the colours of the rooms back and gets the sort of claustrophobic feel a little bit better. But it does expand on the whole behind the scenes aspect of the cube, in that you suddenly have these two kind of stooges, these two guys who seem to be involved and linked in with what's happening in the different cube rooms, which I wasn't sure about, to be honest. And there's also this weird arch villain type character in this film called Jax, who comes across like a kind of dodgy Batman villain, and I kind of has this sort of weird comical aspect to him, which some people might enjoy. I wasn't sure. I'm kind of 50-50 about his character and whether it really works for this film. I'm not totally sure. I'm not totally convinced myself. Very, very strange. But again, some some pretty good set pieces in this film. One or two interesting twists towards the end, I guess, with what happens and who kind of escapes. It's still not very good overall, though. I would still say, the first film's the one to watch, not really Hypercube or Cube Zero, but Cube Zero, if anything, maybe what makes it, like I say, the look of the film, but I guess it feels at times, because it expands a bit on the idea of the cube, it at least is trying something new, which the second film didn't really do so much. So at least Cube Zero tries something a bit newer than that film. So anyway, I haven't given these films actually scores out of 10, which I was going to do, so I'll do that now. So Cube Zero for me, Cube 1, the original film, I would give an 8 out of 10, I think. It's not a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a really neat concept, possibly an inspiration to, the Saw films with the sort of traps idea as well, I think. And genuinely a gripping film to watch from start to finish. Cube 2 Hypercube, I'm going to give... I don't know. Maybe a 5 out of 10. I'd still say that means it's just, it's watchable, and it's not a great film. I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10, I think. And then lastly, Cube Zero, I think I'll give a 6 out of 10, because it at least tries to expand the cube idea, and it looks better as a film overall. So I'll give Cube Zero a 6. So yeah, that's my take on the three cube films. It was nice to revisit these films, rewatch them actually. I enjoyed doing that, and like I say, even though the sequels aren't great, they still offer something that is interesting, I think, to still watch and follow, and some ideas that are kind of unique, even if they're not necessarily very well executed. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're particularly for Cube fans, hope you stopped by and enjoyed this, and do let me know whether you enjoy the trilogy, which ones you really like, and maybe the ones you don't like. Otherwise, from me, as always, take care everybody. Bye for now.